Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Zerto. The title is Carpe Data, Recover from Ransomware in Minutes. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we actually get started with the presentation. If you have any specific questions, we will have Q&A at the end, but we highly recommend that you check the questions tabs in your GoToWebinar control panel. That way, Heisbert, who's also joining on this presentation, will be able to answer any question that you have. If it's not answered, we'll wait to the end of the presentation and do a live Q&A as well. So I want to thank you for your time. This presentation is also going to be recorded and available on demand with the corresponding slides as well, if you're not able to make the whole thing or you want to send it to some colleagues as well. So we highly recommend that you make sure that you're alert on email to just get your link for the presentation as well for the recording. So thank you so much, and let's get started. Just as a quick introduction, for the speakers today, my name is Andy Fernandez. I'm a product marketing manager here at Zerto, and I'm joined by Heisbert Jansen van Doorn. He's our director of technical marketing. So we'll be focused today on some of the content, and Heisbert's actually going to help us out with a demo that we've been discussing. So as far as the agenda for today, we're going to go over the evolution of ransomware attacks, what we've seen probably the last 2 years, and how these these attacks have changed. After that, we're going to look at some of the inherent challenges of backup technology, move on to a way of rethinking backup and rethinking recovery with continuous data protection, and we're going to have our live demo on recovering from ransomware. After that, we'll go over a few other aspects of the Zerto platform, some calls to action and resources for you as well, and then also provide any final answers to your questions. So let's get started. So just if we look at, the last year, I mean, we've already talked about this. You've seen the buzzwords talking about, how tough of a year it has been and how taxing has been all of us. But one of the things that has also increased, right, throughout last year was the volume and severity of ransomware attacks. And so what I did was just some research on some of the more high-profile cases just in December of 2020. I wanted to give it just an insight into the volume, the severity of these attacks that are happening every single day. So I got a few, and just these are a few examples of financial institutions, healthcare organizations, governmental agencies, telecom, retail, that are all being affected by ransomware attacks. Some specifically targeted, some more high volume attacks as well. And this is just a snapshot of what happened in December. And there's so many more. So what it's really showing us is that this is here to stay. It's evolving, it's changing, it's growing in volume, and it's growing in severity. And a lot of the understandings that we have about their technology are changing. And if there's any indication of that, it's just thinking about everything that's going on with the SolarWinds breach and everything that has happened within our government as well around cybersecurity. It's clear that our cyber criminals and these syndicate organizations are ahead of us in the innovation scale. And we have to make sure that as we prepare, as we look at our cybersecurity frameworks, that we do everything that we can to not only focus on prevention, but also on being able to recover, not if, but when our data is encrypted as well. And just one statistic that I wanted to share from Gartner's report that it was just released this year on ransomware is that by 2025, at least 75% of IT organizations will face one or more attacks, as Free Rein researchers document a dramatic increase in ransomware attacks during 2020, pointing to 7-fold or higher rates of growth. It's clear that there are no ethics behind these attackers and that they look at the most vulnerable organizations. And a pandemic made that especially easy for them to attack when you have organizations learning how to deal with remote work, moving their infrastructure elsewhere, having to consolidate, deal with more new tools and behaviors within the workplace. It's clear that everyone was very susceptible, and these cyber criminals identified that, and they've only increased the scale and volume of their attacks as well. But it's not just about volume, it's not just about having more attacks and more cyber criminals out there, but it's also an evolution in the way that these attacks happen. And what we've noticed is an interesting evolution where previously data was just simply encrypted at a high level. But what we're seeing now is that these hackers, these cyber criminals, they're targeting backups. One, because once you're able to encrypt your backups, then you aren't able to recover. But most importantly as well, they're targeting backups to actually identify which is the most critical tier 1, tier 2 information and applications that your organization is backing up. and how to be able to actually encrypt that so that you're more likely to pay a ransom. We're also seeing that sometimes ransomware is just a component of a much broader attack. We're seeing this where organizations are at first, encrypting data, and even if somebody pays a ransom, they're then still leaking critical information, especially when it comes to governmental agencies, when it comes to healthcare and financial institutions. They're leaking credentials. They're leaking critical information, and that has legal and compliance implications as well. So it's not just a specific ransomware attack, but it's a threat landscape as a whole. And what we're seeing as well is kind of just an evolution in warfare. And we're seeing, international governments backing a lot of these cybercriminal syndicates, or even performing their own cybercriminal activities as well. So we're seeing a level of sophistication, a scale, and a thought process that is continuously evolving and becoming more and more vicious. And when we think about that, we have to identify exactly what we can do as an organization, right? So when I say this, at Zerto, we're not a cybersecurity specific vendor, right? We're not somebody who's going to focus on prevention. And first and foremost, there is no single solution that can help you completely mitigate the risk of ransomware. What we focus on is within the NIST cybersecurity framework, the recovery piece. That's what's most critical to Zerto. That's going to be critical to the conversation today as we talk about backups. But as we do that, let's actually take a look at what happens during a ransomware attack. What are the actual components of the attack? Well, first and foremost, you have the actual penetration of the network. Whatever activity happens that allows the credentials to be stolen and remote access to be allowed for these organizations. Then you have the actual stealing of these credentials for critical systems accounts, being able to target backup, Active Directory, and any other type of critical credentials as well. Then in some cases, you have an attack on the backup administration console, whether it's to encrypt it or to identify which copies and which information and applications are most critical to the company. And then you actually have data theft, right? Not just encryption, but you also have the organization that has a goal to steal this data, whether it's to sell it to a competitor or to be able to simply leak it and cause further damage to the brand. This is especially true when we're seeing government-backed attacks as well. This is much more part of that specific type of attack. So as we talked about today, the focus is on recovery. And when people think about recovery from ransomware, they traditionally think about their backup technology. So, from Gartner's perspective, and even looking at how we develop our solution around recovery, there are 3 critical steps that you can take to be able to make sure that, at least when it comes to be able to mitigating the risk of a ransomware attack and protecting your data, you're able to do so. The first thing is to be able to actually detect your attacks. The backup system is well placed to aid in the early detection just because of the data that's being processed and the information and access that it has within your data center. So you have to take a look at your backup technology, understand what additional tools, what type of data reuse do I have to be able to detect some type of threat within my system. And then you also have to make sure that you're taking the right steps to protect your backup system to avoid it being encrypted and to avoid it being targeted and used to find out what is the critical information at the company. And what we're going to focus on today is what can you do to make sure that you're actually recovering from attacks? Not just in the sense of, does my technology allow me to recover to a specific checkpoint and recover a file, a folder, an application, or an entire site, but that most folks in my IT organization are comfortable with the process, have tested the solution and the recovery protocols, and are comfortable saying that if there is a moment of encryption, we are able to roll back in time and recover our critical applications and data. So out of these 3 steps, the ones that we're going to focus on today is the actual recovery. So when we look at recovering from attacks, we've already talked about it as backup being the primary focus, or the primary driver and tool to be able to recover from ransomware attack. But if you think about the history of backup, if you think about the industry in the last 30, 40 years, there's been incremental evolution, different formats, different file types and strategies, but it's still based on copying data and hosting it somewhere, whether it's hosting it on premises or in the cloud, whether it's disk and tape. It all depends. It's still the same incremental improvements in the technology, but at the same core process, what we're seeing is that backup really hasn't changed. And at Zerto, when we observe the inherent challenges that backup has, we had to take a first principles approach on how do we actually deliver what people are searching for within backup without relying on that legacy traditional approach of backup technology. And just as a quick refresher, as we all are very aware, the traditional approach and best practice that is recommended with backup is that you keep 3 different copies of your data, 2 different media, and 1 offsite location within the 3-2-1 rule. But what we've seen is that the 3-2-1 rule is not enough. There needs to be more, and we really need to rethink this. And to give context and an actual example, is a customer of ours who, before Zerto, actually went through a ransomware attack. And within this ransomware attack, their backup strategy was just the traditional approach following the 3-2-1 rule and having backup tape and disk. Their entire file server was affected. And inherently, because of their backup windows, they saw a 12-hour data loss. That's a lot of data, especially for a global international company. 12 hours of data loss is a lot and does affect revenue. But what's really important as well, it's how long it actually took them to recover from this attack. And that was 2 weeks. That's an entire IT organization dedicated to recovering post-attack. That's 2 weeks of not being able to grow revenue, focus on more important things. It's 2 hours focused on a reactive activity post a ransomware attack. So we see that this is clear around every other case study within ransomware, that they're using backup tape and disk. That's a traditional backup strategy. They're still seeing a lot of inherent data loss, and it's taking a long time to be able to recover that. So it's not just an RPO, but also an RTO conversation as well. But why is that? Why is that backup technology is inherently flawed, and it really doesn't apply to the modern standards of availability that we have today? And that's if you look at the traditional recovery process. Here's kind of an example of the processing, the infrastructure using backup technology. And when I say legacy backup, and I mean copies and backup technologies, I'm explicitly talking about snapshots, actually copying data, usually done daily or incrementally. That's what I'm referring to. And as that you can see in this traditional process, the backup software reads the data or the changed data from the production systems and writes this to backup storage. This is done typically using dedicated infrastructure. Now, as I mentioned, this is based on the snapshots of the data itself. And for those utilizing long-term retention, it's usually some sort of offsite storage, such as tape or a cloud archive. Now, why is this a flawed approach? What are the challenges that this brings? Well, let's think about it this way. If you think about the first thing is, as I've already mentioned, organizations are usually performing daily, nightly copies. This is done once every 24 hours, and it leaves a pretty large backup window. And what I mean by that is the fact that if you are encrypted at 6 p.m., your only specific quote unquote checkpoint to recover back to was the day before. That's an entire days of data gone inherently. Even if everything is working correctly, even if you're automatically able to recover to the previous checkpoint, you've already lost a day's worth of data. And that's assuming that you don't go through a failed backup. And why do people only perform daily backups? Well, the reason it's the strain and the performance impact of what having to copy your applications that has on your production environment. So that's inherently one of the biggest flaws that we have, is that because of the strain that snapshots put on production environments, you're only able to really take copies every 24 hours. Usually this also requires dedicated hardware that's expensive, that ages, that also requires a lot of time and maintenance to make sure that it's up and running when you need to be able to perform a restore or recovery. And if you think about it, some ransomware attacks almost look like disaster recovery scenarios. Sometimes entire sites, entire applications are encrypted, not just files and folders. And backup isn't really suited for entire site recovery. That's more of a DR scenario. So it's always really interesting to see how people try to respond to a DR scenario using backup. And that's why it's really not, this hardware is not really suited for that. And ultimately, another issue, we've already talked about the gap in data loss because of the daily copy. But what we haven't talked about is, why does it take organizations absolutely so long to be able to recover post-attack? And we'll cover that in the next slide. And ultimately, you also have to deal with the risk of loss and damaged tapes. But when we talk about that per VM consistency, this is a really important issue. If you think about the nature of your enterprise applications, they all have multiple VMs, right? Think of web servers, load balancers, all these servers that make up what the actual application is. Now, if you are using backup, you're using snapshots. And if you are doing so, you are having to perform incremental snapshots. And what I mean by that is that application, all of the VMs that belong to it are being snapshotted or copied at different points in time throughout the night. So what that means is that if you're trying to just simply back it up and archive it, that's fine. But when you actually have to recover, and when you have to recover quickly, you then have to find the common denominator checkpoint at which all of these are at a consistent recovery. Otherwise, it's an inconsistent recovery. It's not data that you can use. That's why it takes organizations so long. That's why you see such high RTOs when backup is used to recover from ransomware. So this is we've seen two primary challenges. We've seen data loss, and we've seen the amount of time it actually takes to recover multi-VM applications. So with that, I want to focus on what we're doing here at Zerto and kind of the first principle approach that we took at understanding what is the actual problem that we have and what can we do to make sure that, one, we reduce the data loss and that we also reduce the downtime and make sure that it only takes a couple minutes to actually be able to recover and restore an encrypted file, folder, application, or even an entire site. And after that, after we kind of go through the core principles of what continuous data protection is and this new way to recover from ransomware, we'll do a live demo that Heisbert will help us with and kind of really visualize what that looks like. But when we think about continuous data protection, I think in the last 2 years, we're starting to see a lot of organizations come out with a version of what they would call continuous data protection. But when you actually look at the term, when you look at the technology, what is true continuous? That's the key word, continuous data protection. It really relies on three core elements. The first one of it being replication. This means not using snapshots, not using agents, hardware, but actual software-based replication that's near synchronous, and that happens at the hypervisor level. That is the most important piece of continuous data protection. Because if you're using snapshots, that is the antithesis of continuous. Then you have something that's equally as important though, and that's journaling technology, having an actual log, an actual recovery mechanism to be able to roll back in time with. And ultimately, that you have an application-centric approach, not file-centric, not VM-centric, but application-centric, where you treat your applications as a whole and allow for the easy recovery of your entire application stack. These are the three most critical, most important elements of continuous data protection. Now, what I'm going to do here with what we do at Zerto is I'm going to walk through what makes our replication special, our journaling, our application-centric approach, and walk you through our architecture at the same time. And so if you think about what we do at Zerto with continuous replication, our replication happens at the hypervisor level. It's near synchronous replication. And what we do that makes it special is that it's software only. This is a low overhead install that utilizes a scalar architecture. There are no agents, there's no proxies involved here. It is simple software near synchronous replication that is essentially observing and tracking changes and creating checkpoints every 5 seconds. So, instead of having a daily restore point or a daily recovery point, you've created thousands of recovery points that you can easily look into and roll back in time to. That's what makes Zerto special. And if you look at our architecture here, you see what we call the ZVM and the VRA. The ZVM, think of that as the actual management component, the interface that you deal with to be able to manage this site. The VRA, that's what moves the data. That's the replication appliance, the replication engine that is replicating to another site all of these track changes. And so one of the things that we do in a very interesting way is that we take this DR technology that you trust, right, with the crown jewels of your environment, your tier 1, tier 2 critical data. We've essentially orchestrated and thought about it in a way that allows for backup and DR to happen. And the way that we do that is actually having replication happen with a journal at the local level. This means on your primary storage, on your production site, you have an observed replica on the compressed journal with a couple of days of retention. This allows you to simply restore and recover on things that were immediately deleted. And it's also a large percentage of backup scenarios, including ransomware, especially when we talk about files, folders, and VMs being encrypted. This is what you would use at the production level locally to simply restore. Now, what happens if you actually have an entire site encrypted, right? So a large scale attack that's more of a DR scenario. Well, with Zerto, we're constantly replicating using the VRA to the secondary site of your choice, right? Your DR site using physical storage, whether that's on premises at another location at a colo facility, or using public cloud or a service provider. We also allow this. So within this, you have two methods of recovery depending on the severity attack and the type of data that is targeted as well. Now, we've talked about thousands of checkpoints to be able to recover 5 seconds apart. That's a lot, right? That's a lot to think about comparing to having to manage one checkpoint to simply recover and accept your data loss. How do we simplify that? Well, the way that we do it is our journaling technology. And at a very high level, before getting into the architecture, this is essentially how it works. Think of these as checkpoints that are happening every 5 seconds that are being observed both locally and remote as well. Now, if you have a specific attack and you understand that at this granular point in time, with seconds of differentiation, that your data has been encrypted, you can simply roll back in time, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a minute, depending on what you're comfortable with and what type of threat identification software that you have. But using this journal-based recovery, this log, you're able to simply roll back and recover to any point in time, even seconds before, of an entire site, of an entire application, of a VM, or even a single file. And the way that that works, and that makes our journaling special, right? You have a local journal that's compressed, and you also have a remote journal that's at your DR site. Now, this journal at Zerto, we would describe it simply as a log that contains all of the changes that have occurred on a VM. Think of the checkpoints. They have seconds of granularity. You have thousands of recovery checkpoints a day. The journal scales up and down dynamically, and it's observed per VM. You have one interface that you're dealing with for all of the applications, but you simply select the application and select the granular recovery point. This journal also allows you to help recover an entire site, application, VM, folder, or a file. And what it actually looks like, if you just look at a quick screenshot, you actually see Highs use the journal as well during the demo, is you can observe already, you've selected the VM, you've looked at the specific checkpoint, and you're simply able to jump to a specific date, you're able to search for a checkpoint, and you can even see and understand the 5 seconds of granularity that you have here. And this really allows you to reduce the amount of time that it takes you to recover, but also just from an RPO perspective as well. And we've talked about having an application-centric approach to recovering from ransomware, or really any recovery scenario. How do we actually do that? Well, one of the things that we're going to cover as well is the fact that it's not just one specific mechanism to be able to recover from ransomware. The way that we've created our architecture, the way that we've done this is the fact that, as we've already talked about, you have a local journal for continuous backup. Think of that, as a week of being able to restore anything that is deleted, corrupted, encrypted locally. Then if it's something a bit more severe, whether it's a DR scenario, the entire site is encrypted, you're able to simply recover from your DR site, whether that is in the cloud or on premises. What we've also enabled as well is to simply be able to store data long-term as well. Think after 30 days, you want to be able to ensure that you use low-cost storage. Think public cloud, AWS, Azure, think of your purpose-built backup appliances. And what Zerto does is you have your local backup, you have your DR site, and then you would have long-term retention. Think of long-term retention as your ability to simply retain data for long periods of time, but can also be used in the scenario that you need to recover from a ransomware attack. So and I don't want to say multiple lines of defense because this isn't prevention technology, but I would say multiple lines of being able to recover. Now, to the point that I was getting around application consistency, what we do differently is we treat your application as a cohesive unit, meaning that when you're configuring Zerto, you can select all of the VMs that belong to this application, set the configuration settings, and be able to simply observe the checkpoints and recover from them. So, what we call that is a virtual protection group. So as you can see, whether it's a CRM application, ERP, SQL, Oracle, it doesn't matter. You select the VMs that are part of it, and you're able to select your retention policy and your recovery settings as well. And that allows you to illustrate it to do this, to simply say, if I understand the exact point in time that I've been encrypted, or I have a desired selected checkpoint, I can simply recover the entire application consistently. Instead of having to rely on the incremental technology, and instead of having to almost do the math and find common denominator checkpoints, you simply treat your applications as a whole. This is true workload protection. This is what accelerates and helps you have those RTOs that are desirable within an IT organization. So with that, understanding, what true continuous data protection means from a replication perspective, from a journaling technology, from an application-centric approach, let's actually take a look at a demo. And with that, I'm going to introduce Heispert, who's going to showcase how this actually works in real life in a live lab. So Heis, I'm going to transition over to you and change the presenter, make sure that you're able to access this.
Thank you very much, Andy. Great setup, great intro into the demo, and let's see if I can one, make this work, because yes, we're doing a live demo, so always exciting times when doing live demos, and hopefully you can all see my screen. If someone,
yeah, we can
Andy,
see it.
Great, thanks a lot. And let's go through 2 of the recovery scenarios, and I'll actually simulate. I'm not going to be brave enough to actually do a ransomware encryption, so I'm going to fake it a little bit. Trust me, I've tried to find actual ransomware, but when you actually try to find it, it's a lot harder than you think. So I've got my Zerto environment up and running. I'm protecting my applications. And as Andy explained, we protect them as one entity, as one logical container, which we call virtual protection group, so VPG. So when I switch to the VPG view of my environment, you can see me protecting multiple applications. I'm doing both local protection and remote protection to a different site. So I've set up 2 sites. I've got one site in Boston, one site in Arnhem, which happens to be the city I live in the Netherlands. And you can see the actual RPO I'm achieving right now. So 11 seconds, 4 seconds, being updated continuously because it's continuous replication. Now, today we're going to focus on the WinFS01, or the Windows File Server 01, which I'm replicating locally. So when I look into it, I'm achieving an RPO of 4 seconds right now. I can see all the changes that I'm processing. I've got 6 days of history in my journal where I can recover from, but I'm also protecting it to a remote site. So if I, to a long-term retention repository. So if I go into the settings, you can actually see that on a daily basis, I'm also copying it to a repository on a different site and keep it there for 4 weeks. So I have multiple locations to recover from, just as Andy described during the presentation. So let's log into that file server and actually start doing some bad stuff. So I've got a share, and that contains all the PDF files that I've been working on for many weeks. They're very important to me. I'm marketing, so they need to be nice and flashy. But I also see this very interesting batch file. So as I'm very curious what it is, let me quickly double click it. So what happens? So as I double click this, oops, I now lost all my files. So all of them are encrypted. They got a random file name. There's no way for me to figure out what they are. So now I need to recover. Now, for those who pay close attention to the time, I clicked it around 5 p.m. 30, end of 30 minutes. So let's see what the power of the journal can do. So what I'm actually going to do first is, because I only have a few files encrypted, I'm going to recover only those files. So I simply go to Restore, go to File, go to the server I want to recover the files to, select the checkpoint. As you can see, there's a checkpoint every 5 seconds. So basically, we're taking a backup every 5 seconds. So I'm somewhere around the 30 minutes. So let's be safe, and I'll take the 5:29:58 p.m. Click Next. I'm going to start the mount. So this gives me the ability to actually browse the file system and see if my files are still unencrypted in that file system. And if they are, I can simply recover them. So the file system is mounted. I'm going to browse the file system. They're on my C drive. They're in my shares. They're in my marketing folder. So let me see. Oh, see, wonderful. There are all my PDF files. So what I can do right now is, and I'll select one at first, start recovering those files. So I'm going back to this one, and I want to restore it back to production system. So I don't want to download it or anything. So I'm going to choose my credentials, so which we use to actually access that server and make sure that we can restore those files, and I simply click restore. So what happens now is Zerto will recover those files or that selected file into the source VM. So if I now go into that VM, I see a new folder called Z Restored, timestamps, dates, and there is my recovered file again. So as you can see, it's really fast. Went back to only a minute before I accidentally started the encryption. But what if I have an entire server encrypted? What if I have multiple servers encrypted? Now, so I'm going to walk you through that recovery process as well. So what I'm going to do is, instead of doing a restore, I'm going to do a failover of that specific VM. Let me quickly stop the file level restore first. We already recovered the file. We're done. No need to restore files anymore. Everything's encrypted, so I have way more to do. So I'm going to failover. I'm going to live because we are having an issue right now. I'm going to click next. I'm going to make sure that my source VM is being shut down. I'm going to click next. I'm going to start the failover. So what actually happens now is, oh, I forgot a very, very important thing. Let me go back. Who caught that one? I need to make sure that I'm not recovering to the last point in time because my files are still corrupted. I want to make sure that I go back in time. Again, the journal has a checkpoint every 5 seconds, so I can just simply pick and choose from that one. Now, I know that the 2958 was a good one because that's what I used to recover the files from. As you can see, used for file level restore. I can go back to that one, click OK, click next, and start failover. So what is actually going to happen now is that the original VM, the Windows file server, is being shut down. And as soon as it's shut down, it will actually start the replicated version of it locally within a couple of minutes. Now, this is only one VM, but the process is similar, or actually the same for multiple VMs. The process is the same for an entire site. So I can recover really fast. I'm going to make sure that my files are still there. So let me see if I can still recover into the VM. Well, as you can see, the file server has been shut down. I no longer have my RDP session open. So we'll wait for the failover to complete. Actually, it's completed successfully. So let me check if that VM is already started, because that's the only thing it needs. It needs the ability to start. And as soon as it's restarted, I'll have access to my files again. So here we go, logging into the file server. I'm logged into it. I'm going to open the shares again. And there we are. All my files are back again as they were before they were encrypted within a matter of minutes. I think this demo only took a couple of minutes, and in that meantime, I've been able to show you a file restore or a full restore of the VM. So this is how quickly you can actually recover from ransomware without losing any type of data. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for watching this this demo. I'm going to hand it back to Andy to guide you through some more interesting information and to round it up. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience there. So as we transition to the demo, I think you're able to clearly see the simplicity, the scale, and simply how quick it is and what the granular checkpoints look like with Zerto. But to give a customer example of somebody who did this, just exactly what Highs did, but at a larger scale within their organization, was the same company that we showcased their example on the first ransomware attack. Now, Takata Protective Fabrics, they went through this first ransomware attack. It was a huge pain. They realized they needed to change their strategy, their backup solution, to really improve both the performance and make sure that the team isn't taking weeks to recover from an attack, that they're actually just doing it quickly and moving forward to operations that are actually productive to the business. So with that second ransomware attack, the only thing that changed within the environment is their strategy. The fact that they transitioned from legacy backup tape and disk to continuous data protection. A very similar attack happened, and they only experienced 10 seconds of data loss. They were able to simply go back in time, 10 seconds to a checkpoint, and recover critical applications, entire applications. And this was a completely different experience that they had, not only in just the actual data loss that they experienced, but almost how much time it took them to recover. They were able to quickly understand when it was encrypted, when to go back to, and it was a very rapid recovery, vastly different from using backup tape and disk. So this is a clear customer example. We actually have some on-demand sessions online where Jamie Williams, from the system engineer of this organization, actually goes through his experience and how he was able to recover and almost be an IT hero of this organization. Now, it's not just ransomware, right? We know that ransomware is simply one recovery scenario that you have within your organization, a very important one, but there are other issues as well. And one of the things that we pride ourselves here at Zerto is this software platform that we have with our architecture, and the first principles approach we've taken to downtime is the fact that not only on reactive activities, right? Think of it as being able to recover entire sites from infrastructure failures, from natural disasters and power outages, which are DR activities, but also from a backup perspective, to be able to recover from ransomware, from file corruptions and deletions, user errors, the things that keeps the lights on. With Zerto, that same journal, that same replication applies to both DR and backup, right? It's bringing the criticality, the orchestration that you trust Zerto with with DR, and using it for backup, right? So extending it across your entire environment, but also being able to fulfill compliance and archiving data for long periods of time using long-term retention. But it doesn't stop there, right? This ability to replicate, this ability to handle data without an impact on production, without downtime, also extends that things are pretty important for your organization as far as proactive decisions, moving workloads, whether you're consolidating data centers, whether you're moving to the cloud, or even adopting a multi-cloud approach. Zerto allows you to simply manage this data with that same experience and do so as well. And that also includes being able to, for test and development resources, for patch management and testing, for infrastructure modernization. And one of the things that I didn't mention about Zerto as well is that we allow you, when it comes back to ransomware, that you're able to isolate this data, to make sure that you can scan it, to make sure that the data has integrity before you roll it back to production, which I believe was one of the questions that came up there as well. So it's an interesting approach. It's software only. And my favorite thing about Zerto that we've already seen is in the demo, it's that it's all managed through one simple interface and experience. One manager that's accessible via anywhere that you're able to conduct all of these operations. And within that, you also need visibility. You need to be able to make sure that you're able to monitor, be able to see what's going on from your environment. You can't recover from something that you don't know is going on, right? So when we look at Zerto Analytics, it's a SaaS delivered, browser-based, available on iOS, available just via browser, anywhere you're visiting. You're able to manage your environment, see the entire topology, see everything that's running at one place in time, be able to monitor, to report, and to plan as well. And you have some of the sample reporting that you see here are live network history. So you actually understand how your network is behaving or how it behaved at a certain point in time. Sometimes it actually helps when you're trying to understand moments of encryption and some anomalies within your organization, within your environment as well. And then you also have your RPO live history report. So this really allows you to make sure that your RPOs are actually according to SLAs, that you can spot anomalies, kind of identify what's going on in this environment, and also troubleshooting scenarios as well. So this is a critical aspect of any type of solution that allows you to recover quickly. You need to be able to visualize it quickly as well. So at the end of the day, we've talked about a very specific recovery scenario here with ransomware. But when you look at what Zerto does, when you look at what this platform does, we have one vision in mind. And that vision is a cloud data management and protection vision. And what that means and how we define that is essentially when we talk about the usual suspects of DR, backup, and workload mobility or data mobility, that you're able to perform this, that you're able to protect, to move, manage your critical VMs, your critical applications, regardless of what infrastructure you select. Whether you say, hey, for now, we're focused specifically on just staying physical and on premises, that's okay. Whether you're using vSphere or Hyper-V, you're able to use Zerto. It's software only. It's not a box or an appliance that requires additional professional services. It's simply something that you plug and play, are able to do it within 2 hours, and you can manage your entire environment. And so when you look at the key capabilities of the platform, it's not just what we've talked about today with backup, but it's DR, continuous backup. Think of that as the local example that we've used. Long-term retention, data mobility, test and development, and security and compliance. So our critical focus is to be able to just be one platform for all of your recovery needs, and to deliver that in a simple, scalable way without having to take your IT team weeks to be able to recover from something, just like we did today with ransomware. So with that, one of the things that I want to leave with you, there are some resources. And just because it's nice to see what Heisberg did within his demo, but if you want to try that out yourself, if you want to take a look at the lab, we have a ransomware lab. And if you click the URL link that you see there, you're able to do that. You also have the IDC Tech Spotlight, kind of dives into objectively how Zerto and continuous data protection, how important it is for a new era of backup and recovery, but also an infotech report, especially if you want to see, what is the ethos of Zerto? How are they ranked? How are other customers using them, and how do they review Zerto? You're able to see that as well. So, and for our customers who are listening in today, we love to hear from you. And we're working on ZertoCon right now. And ZertoCon is an excellent user experience. It's not just for customers, but also for people who are just curious about Zerto. We invite you to speak. If you have a cool story, how Zerto was able to help you, recover from a DR scenario, right? A natural disaster, how you were able to recover from ransomware with Zerto, how you were able to move your applications and migrate to the cloud. Whatever use case Zerto enabled, we'd love for you to be able to speak. I'm going to give a few seconds for you to see the survey there, and so you can learn how to get involved, and there'll be incentives as well. So I want to thank you if you're a customer and you're listening in. I want to thank you a lot as well if you're just curious about Zerto and how it works. Please visit those resources. This presentation will be available on demand as well, and the slides will be available too. So I know that Heis has been answering quite a few questions, but Heis, do you have any questions that popped out to you that you might want to tell for the rest of the audience?
Absolutely. There's a lot of questions out there. So it's great to see a lot of interaction. So I'm gonna pick out a few questions and focus on them specifically. One of the questions that multiple people asked was, okay, great, but how do I know to what point in time I need to restore? Now, Zerto by itself doesn't prevent or detect any ransomware attacks. So we are there when you need to recover. But using, for example, Zerto Analytics and using our analytics and our statistics in our UI, you could actually use that to detect or to actually spot when the encryption starts to happen. Because what happens is that the ransomware starts encrypting your files, and what that will do is it will change a lot of files. It will generate a lot of changes. So what you could see is actually see all those changes happen as we process them. And you could go into Zerto Analytics and actually see when it started. So you need to take a point before all the IOs or all the changes happened. If you integrate Zerto Analytics using our API into your existing monitoring system, and your monitoring system is able to do anomaly detection, you could actually use that to detect any anomaly in your environment and see if you need to act upon it. So no, we don't prevent, but we can definitely help you with identifying to what point in time you would need to recover. Another great question was, am I able to scan restore points, or can I maybe recover in an isolated environment first? And the answer is absolutely, you can. Zerto has a built-in test workflow, and the test workflow gives you the ability to recover a VM, an application, or an entire site into an isolated bubble network. And you can, one, use that to for like forensics. I actually saw a question pop up about forensics, that where they had to freeze the environment for 2 weeks so others could do investigation before they could actually recover. And we actually have an example of a customer who basically used Zerto, build an environment, or actually failed over an environment while it was encrypted, while it was infected, over to an isolated network, and that allowed certain authorities to do their forensics on it. But you can also use that to see if it's the right point in time, if it's a clean point in time. And you can also do it in an automated way, is to start all the VMs and your applications in an isolated network and use some kind of security malware or security scanner to scan them on a regular basis. We actually have customers that do it in an automated way. So there's many workflows and there's many capabilities within Zerto to actually help you get more secure and get more insight into your environment as well. Actually browsing through the questions, many questions. So another question is, does it change when the environment get larger? And it's actually a great question, because I only recovered one file, I only recovered one VM, but the process and the speed will be very similar. Whether I'm recovering 10, 100, or 1,000 VMs, we already have the data available because we're performing replication. We have all the built-in orchestration and automation to ensure that you're being recovered as fast as possible. So the difference between one VM and dozens of VMs is measured in minutes. So you can still recover really quickly in case of an emergency, in case of a disaster. And David, someone asked if they can get a copy of my wonderful fake ransomware batch file, and you absolutely can. I'll reply to you with my email address. It's a simple batch file, but I'll happily send it to you so you can use it internally. Andy, did you see some questions you'd like to answer in there as well?
I saw a few. One of them that I think is very important in differentiation of Zerto is that we actually are software only. And I know that we see the word software defined being used across a lot of backup DR providers, but there's still an appliance behind them, a physical appliance. With Zerto, we are true software, no agents. It's a simple Windows installation. So I want to make sure that that was one of the questions that was addressed. We had a few folks also ask, when it comes to your long-term retention repositories, AWS, Azure, also using NFS or SMB mounts are available to you to use as low-cost storage as well. From a licensing perspective, Zerto does have the ability and the mechanism for you kind of mix and match your architecture, meaning you have specific licensing for your DR tier 1, tier 2 critical applications, and then you have your ability to get the same capabilities around the journal and the replication, but price for backup so that you're able to still achieve a lower TCO compared to other kind of legacy data protection backup tools that we're seeing in the marketplace. If there is any other questions that we have, what we'll do is we'll make sure to get a copy and reach out to you specifically, make sure we give you the resources and answer any additional links that you may need as well to answer that question. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time, your attention. We'll send over the on-demand session, the recording. We'll get to your questions as well. And I really hope that you can take a look at Zerto and kind of take an interesting approach so when it comes to backup technology with Zerto, especially converging them all. So thank you so much. Thanks, Heis, for the demo, for helping with all of the questions as well. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy. Great job. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Looking forward to see you on the next one.
Awesome. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.